And so let's assume that we have no progress in the efficiency of labor. That we know that back before 1800 we essentially had no technological progress, or rather whatever technological progress we had was offset by the fact that we had more people, that the population tended to grow slowly over time. And that after all, if in 1800 you have a much better kind of rice than you had in 900, but if your farm is only a third as large, even rice that's 3 times as good isn't going to get you ahead. So if you assume that there's no improvement in the efficiency of labor before 1800, and if you assume that technology is fairly well diffused across Eurasia at least, that there's nothing that's well known in one region that can't be found out in another, and if you're willing to assume that the capital share diminishing returns in our production function is not too large, that is, that increases in the amount of physical capital in investment don't produce very large increases in income, in large part because the level of technology is relatively low, and so adding more machines doesn't necessarily help you very much. You already have 1 plow and 2 oxen. Add another plow and 2 more oxen, what good does it do you? There's only one of you. You have to guide the plow. The oxen can't guide the plow by themselves, and you don't have numerically computer-controlled robots to guide the other oxen and plow with you. Maybe you can hook up your 4 oxen to your plow and cut a deeper furrow, but you're not going to do a great deal to increase your productivity with more capital. If we start with that, then I think we're going to be able to explain, or at least understand, why the world as a whole in 1800 is relatively equal. First implication is demography, that this is 1800. This is back before the widespread availability of artificial birth control. This is back in the days when your life expectancy was low. And so if you were an adult and if you wanted to buy some form of life insurance, the best way to do that was to have a bunch of kids. That after all, once the kids are 6, they can start weeding effectively in the garden, and that's a help. Once the kids are 8, they can start spinning and weaving effectively. That's a help. At a relatively young age, kids become a net addition to the productive resources of the households. They're, after all, they're kids. They don't eat very much, at least until they become teenagers. And if you're living in a pre-industrial society, the only form of life insurance that you can buy are people who'll be alive when you're old to help take care of you when you break your leg. Those are almost surely your children and your grandchildren. And as long as infant mortality is high and life expectancy is short, you've got to have a lot of kids to have a good chance of having surviving dependents when you hit 60, let alone when you hit 80. These tend to mean that a richer country is going to have a higher population growth rate because people are going to be having more kids and feeding them better if they're richer. Women are not going to be spending as many years with fat reserves sufficiently low that they don't ovulate. Children are not going to be spending so many years with their immune systems so impaired by vitamin deficiencies, that they drop dead when the common cold comes around. Back in pre-industrial societies, a richer country would have a higher population growth rate. That means that even if other things would make you rich, say if you had a high savings rate, well, then you're going to have a higher population growth rate too. And that higher N, that's going to offset some of the benefits of higher savings. So you won't get that much richer from saving a thrifty society which saves more. And even if the S over N plus delta term is pretty big, well, as long as alpha is relatively small, as long as you haven't invented very many of the different kinds of productive capital goods we have, even big differences in capital intensity across economies aren't going to lead to very big differences in output and output per worker. But nevertheless, we have not just an equal world, we have a poor world, and we have an unequal world within economies. Why aren't there some societies that are stagnant but richer? Why is everybody relatively poor? And also, why is every society relatively unequal? Why does every society have an upper class and a king or an emperor or at least a group of guild masters who control things? Well, suppose that you had a relatively high standard of living back before 1800 because your society had a relatively low population density because you had lots of resources per capita. What's likely to happen then? Well, 2 things could happen. First is because you have a relatively high standard of living, your people want to buy life insurance by having lots of children, and your population grows. And all of a sudden, your edge in terms of natural resources per capita is gone. Not tomorrow and not in 25 years, but over the next 200 years. Second, if you have a relatively high standard of living because you're sharing out your production fairly, well, they're the people over the next hill, and they're not sharing out their production fairly, which means that some of them are learning to ride horses while carrying spears and stick things from people from the horses, from the spears while they're on the horses. And when they come over the hill and they want your stuff, you aren't going to be able to resist very effectively. Unless, of course, you're the Mongols and the Huns and live out on the prairie all the time and everyone rides horses. But otherwise, unequal societies have an enormous advantage in terms of whenever a war starts. And so societies tend to become more and more unequal over time. That kind of produces the world we see in 1800, at least from this economic growth perspective. So now another reading or retention question. When was the world most unequal? And if you're puzzled because you haven't heard that in this lecture, I don't think you have. This was a throwaway remark from 2 lectures ago in order to figure out whether you've managed to retain this. Okay, we're up to 130, which is, well, okay. Answers today. Somewhat of a trick question. Actually, it was 1975. 1975 was when world income inequality peaked. It wasn't unequal in 10,000 BC, because back in 10,000 BC we were still pretty much all hunter-gatherers. It wasn't terribly unequal in 1800, because that was the end of the agrarian age, during which it was extremely difficult in order to attain any significant difference in living standard in society across society. But in 1975, the level of global inequality was actually larger than it is today. And here's a picture of how the world's diverged between 1800 and today, with the United States being the kind of very odd color. I don't know what I'd call that color. It's certainly not California gold, which is what it's supposed to be. The kind of sickly greenish, like the color that a cow bear would paint if it was sick, slightly, feeling queasy. That's the United States up at the top. But Argentina, the other sickly gold, smaller snake trail behind it. Back in 1800, you ask what's the difference between the United States and Argentina, and people say one's in the northern hemisphere, the other's in the southern hemisphere. They look very, very similar in terms of their natural resources and their climate. They look very, very similar in terms of their ability to attract migrants from Europe. Yet the United States now has income per capita above $40,000 per year. Argentina's stuck back at $10,000 or so, more in a good year, less in a bad. Japan, Japan's the end of the red snake, up at the top, fairly close to the United States, but with a significantly longer life expectancy. A life expectancy that's pretty much always been longer than the United States, except for when Curtis LeMay's B-29s were bombing Japan at the end of World War II, which seems that something like 3% of people in Japan died in I forget whether this is 1944 or 1945, and relatively few of those who died were soldiers. Then I also, for fun, put China itself up smack here. And the thing to notice about the large snake that's China is this is 1975. Right? And that's why the world was more unequal in 1975 than it's been since, because China in 1975 was still no richer in living standards than it had been in 1800. And last, this is covered up a little blue snake, is Zimbabwe, which is richer than it was back in 1800, and which does have a longer life expectancy than it did have in 1800. So it's not the case that things haven't gotten any better in Zimbabwe over the past 210 years. But things have gotten much, much better in life expectancy, living standards, and productivity levels pretty much every place else, especially every place outside of Africa. Not so in Zimbabwe. Yep. We fight over this, especially demographers. One view is it's overwhelmingly equalization. That is, China in 1800 is the unequal country of landlords and peasants. By China in 1975, well, you've shot many of the ex-landlords, and you've taken many of the children of ex-landlords, and you've sent them out to the countryside to gather eggs and learn from the workers and peasants. And so income is much more equally divided, and that will produce significant benefits in life expectancy if you no longer have extremes of rich and poor. The second thing is that we learned an awful lot about public health between 1750 and 1925, and we're able to apply that. When you figure out the importance of keeping your drinking water from getting contaminated by cholera, for example, that's an easy 5 years on life expectancy from reduced infant mortality right then and there. Similarly, a whole bunch of minor interventions that even today, mothers with children who are suffering from incredible amount of diarrhea when they get dysentery. At some point, people will say, well, it doesn't do any good to keep giving them liquids. It's just all coming out the other end. And that's exactly wrong. If you have someone with dysentery, the only way to keep ahead of it is to make sure that you keep flooding them with liquids so that as much goes in as comes out, because that's how the disease spreads. Right? Its idea is it multiplies inside your body and then comes out in the liquid, and then it infects other people. The disease doesn't care if it kills you as long as it spreads itself far enough and fast enough. And so you can get ahead of dysentery and of other diseases simply by doing the appropriate simple home therapies. Fourth and last, increased income does matter, and does matter a bunch. So you can see the breakpoints between the ages in which it was overwhelmingly public health and the age at which our increases in life expectancy are driven in large part by income coming around 1900, when you've gotten the easy low-hanging fruit in terms of public health. And then thereafter, there's a much closer relationship. It's much greater percentage of the increases in life expectancy come from increases in productivity. We have recently some signs of a change, if only because the American lifestyle, at least, is sufficiently unhealthy in lots of ways, as to make people think that possibly we've gone beyond the curve, and we at least may be at a stage where additional income is actually going to start reducing our life expectancy or putting downward pressure on it with medical technology working the other way. It's probably good to eat meat and get meat protein up to 4 times a week, but a Big Mac at every meal is not good, not good at all. And so Divergence gave us the world as it is today, with income per capita levels spread out all the way from $50,000 all the way down to $400 per person per year. A spread of income that's 100-fold, and these are income measures that take account of the fact that it's more expensive to live in San Francisco than it is to live in Harare. Even taking account of the fact that rich countries have high price levels, these are supposedly the best estimates we have of real differences in standard of living across countries. There's just no comparison between the world of 1800 back here and the world of today in terms of how unequal things have gotten. And there is the consolation. Right? The consolation is that we have had a bunch of convergence since 1975 or 1980. That you kind of do global statistics of inequality across people in the world. The numbers today are much lower than the numbers were back in 1975 or 1980. And I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate that this convergence appears only if you count each person as one rather than if you count each country as one. That is, if you take a random person in a random country X, and then another random person in another random country Y, and say how big is the gap in relative terms between their incomes, you'll get the same answer today that you did back in 1975. That the universe of countries is no closer than it was back then. Yeah? Right. Yeah, within country, inequality is just not a factor. That inequality across countries absolutely swamps inequality within countries, and has ever since about 1840 or so, in its contribution to the dispersion of the global distribution of income. Even a very rich person in China in 1980, in relative terms, was very poor by American standards. The convergence we see across people is solely because 2 big countries have done very well since 1980. Take China and India out of the sample, and the world today is actually more unequal, both on a per-person, on a cross-person, and on a cross-country level than it was back in 1980. And you can say that, well, isn't it wonderful that the governments of China and India have actually been growth-oriented since 1980? That's a magnificent thing for human well-being. On the other hand, if you want to be pessimistic, you can say, but wait a minute, that's just pure luck. There's no sign that governments as a whole have gotten any better at figuring out what to do to guarantee prosperity. And I don't know how much confidence you have in the ability of China and India to continue to have good economic growth-promoting governance over the next 50 years. What they say in Singapore is that the Qing dynasty had 3 good emperors, starting with Kangxi and ending with Qianlong, after which things fell apart. If you don't have democratic succession processes, it's unclear how many good emperors in a row you can expect to have. The record in world history, as far as I know, is 5, the Antonine dynasty of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD. No other system of hereditary or semi-hereditary succession has ever managed to do that well. So, another reading question from last time. We've seen a bunch of economic growth since 1800 that puts China today in about the same position relative to the U.S. in its living standards as it was back in 1800. How much richer is China now than it was back in 1800? At least according to Hans Rosling's numbers at gapminder.org. And we like to have seminars about whether those numbers are right or wrong, but for the purposes of this course, let's take them to be right. Yep, and we're homing in on the right answer, I think. About 20-fold for a country that does relatively well over the past 2 centuries. And over the past 5 years, China has graduated from a country that was doing okay to a country that's been doing relatively well in terms of its economic growth over the past 2 centuries. And you look at the extraordinary divergent world today, and I've telegraphed this before, my first reaction is to say just what the frack is going on here. That after all, we have a world of extraordinarily cheap international trade and communications. We ship t-shirts from Shanghai to Oakland, and we can sell them in Oakland cheaper than we can sell American-made t-shirts in Oakland, even though we've included the cost of shipping the thing 7,000 miles across the ocean. In fact, we've already shipped it across the ocean. That the life cycle of a t-shirt, as Georgetown University economics professor Pietro Rivoli likes to say, is actually quite complicated. In the limit, a t-shirt starts as cotton in Texas, which is then freeze-dried and shipped by train from Long Beach, where it's then exported to a manufacturing center in Asia. Soon we won't be able to use Shanghai anymore. Soon it'll be someplace further south or someplace poorer. Soon it'll be India, I think. And then we ship the t-shirt from Shanghai to Jakarta to get dyed, and then from Jakarta to Miami Beach. And what happens when the t-shirt is given away to Goodwill? Does it stay in Philadelphia? No, it's shipped off to Africa, where it's sold in the used clothing market in Mombasa. And then the money goes back to Goodwill, and it uses it to pay the rent to keep the lights on. That over the course of its economic lifetime, a single t-shirt is going to travel 24,000 miles all the way around the world. And this is for something with an ugly picture of a parrot on it, which has a cheap retail value of $9.99. That in terms of our collective power to move stuff around the world, from wherever production is happening to wherever people are, is absolutely, totally awesome. Far exceeds what any previous century would have imagined. And yet the world today is this extraordinarily unequal beast that we see in this particular graph. And the question is why? Why has the world become so unequal back in 1975? And also, why are there signs that the world has become more equal since 1975? What is it that has led us to be more optimistic? Sorry, okay, we'll hide it. What is it that has made us more optimistic? What has gone right since 1975? Okay, I telegraphed the answer as E, and yet you want to pick up something else by and large. That's okay. Answer A, because expanded world trade has diminished international price differentials, is the answer you'll get in an economics course, especially in an international trade course. But actually, when you try to do the arithmetic, the fact that expanded world trade has made it possible to buy cheap things where they aren't made, that's a factor. It's not a huge factor. Right? For us, it means that we can buy French wines cheaply in California and Chilean grapes in December when the California grapes ain't growing. And it means we can buy cheap textiles in San Francisco, but most of the time in San Francisco we want to buy expensive textiles, which are still made largely in Los Angeles. A is a factor, but the expansion of world trade really hasn't done that much to make the world more equal in the last 25 years. Answer B, I kind of think about, is kind of the left-wing Democratic base answer, that outsourcing has reduced wage levels in the North Atlantic industrial core. And here again, it's there. It's very, very small. Say that outsourcing accounts for maybe 10% of the reduction in the speed of real wage growth in the North Atlantic industrial core over the past quarter century, and for virtually none of the drawing together of the world. Answers C and D are kind of development studies answers, and I think they're fairly wrong, right? That revolutions have ended colonialism, but the end of colonialism did not lead to any convergence in living standards across the globe, and we do indeed have a bunch of nationalist coups that have reduced neocolonialism. That practically every country is now able to strike its own deals with the multinationals that have invested in it and extract as much from them as the government wishes. But there's no sign that that ability to extract resources has filtered down to the average standard of living of the people. It has made a whole bunch of elites wealthy, but they then tend to move and live in Switzerland on around the Riviera after they're overthrown. I think the right answer to this is E. The world has become a lot more equal since 1975 because things have gone politically and economically more right than wrong in China and India, and that's kind of what you should focus on. Look rather than looking for some deep systemic determinants. And in some ways that's quite depressing because that tells us that we've largely been lucky over the past 25 years, 30 years, and that maybe the factors that tended to make the world become more unequal between 1800 and 2000 and 1975 are still at work. They've just been masked by a generation of good luck. So, to put that another way, there are always countries that are catching up to the world's productivity frontier and then are